Hello everyone, I'm Boofire191. The Black Swordsman arc. Is it the perfect opening to a series, or does it miss the mark? Now, to answer this question, I have the Masked Man with me here today to discuss the subject, because I'm told talking to yourself too often is bad for your health. Say hello, Masked Man.
Yo, how's it going, everybody? How y'all doing today?
Cool. So, we got past the opening, now it's time for the hard part. The Black Swordsman arc, or specifically in this instance, the Black Swordsman chapter, the very first chapter of Berserk. What's your stance on it? Do you think it's the perfect opening, or do you believe otherwise?
So, when it comes to the very first chapter of Berserk, I kind of came into it a little bit skewed. I got into Berserk because I saw the Death Battle video, and so for me reading it, I already knew a little bit of the knowledge ahead, right? So for me personally, it was perfect. I loved the introduction, it set the tone, it did what it needed to do, but I can definitely understand the position where other people come from, where they read it and it throws them off. But for me personally, I think it did a great job.
For me, similar-ish situation. I started out with the Berserk Golden Age films because they were on Netflix, and I was bored. And I began watching them. So it provides a lot of context for why Guts is the way he is, which would otherwise be absent. It takes a few chapters to kind of establish, or at the very least allude to, why Guts is such an overwhelming asshole in the first chapter. So going in with that knowledge, I was able to tolerate the aggressive edginess, I guess, a lot better than I probably would have. I have no issue with edgy characters, but it seemed a bit over the top.
Yeah.
At least I think that's the case. It's because it's hard to imagine yourself as like someone back in the late 80s, early 90s, picking this up and reading it for the first time, because you have the foreknowledge of, well, the Golden Age films, or at least in that instance I did.
Yeah.
For the entire Black Swordsman arc, I think it is the roughest chapter.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of... So, as someone who does a lot of weird story content, who also has written comics, which haven't seen the light of day, it's fine. A lot of times what you start out with your first chapter, because you're still trying to find your footing with the characters, the setting, everything, it may not be what it is a few chapters later, when you finally hit your stride.
Yeah.
And a kind of a good example of that is the very first page, or actually the first 3 pages of Berserk.
Yeah.
And this, I've wanted to kind of make a video on this for a while, because it feels wildly out of character for Guts to be doing what he's doing. So for those at home who, I don't know, haven't read, Guts is banging an apostle. It feels like something that is very late 80s, early 90s, like shock value for comics.
Yeah.
Where it's like, this is to grab your attention, and it feels odd.
Forced.
Because I wouldn't even say forced. It just, when you come to learn about Guts as a character throughout the Golden Age and beyond, it doesn't make sense. He comes across as a guy who's very loyal to Casca, and a guy who wouldn't
do that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For me, I say when I first read it, right, and I see it, that's one of the reasons I don't own any solid copies, because I don't want, one of my siblings to be like, oh, I wonder what this Berserk's like. Bam! And, it's just Guts going in on this girl. And I think the way, because I remember us kind of talking about it, you telling me that you had an issue with that specific, part, the first 3 pages. And when I thought about it a little bit, I think the only valid excuse I could come up with is that this is Guts, right? And even though I would agree it's definitely out of his character, I think the only way you could really justify it is that he was able to leave Casca in the first place, right? And obviously it's different, leaving somebody to go on a quest of killing revenge and actually, having sexual intercourse with an apostle. But if he was able to leave Casca for an entire 2 years and forget about her, it felt like, him doing what he did there didn't seem too out of place. I guess that's a justification you could use if you wanted. But I definitely agree with you there. It seems something that just makes Guts out to be like this over edgy, just jerk.
Yeah, it's one of those things, because I know this is the apostle that kills Corcus. And when you factor that in, because she like puts Corcus in a trance, or he's just losing his mind, so it's a very sexual experience before he's chomped on. Having this is like ironic reincorporation, which is fine, and if Corcus was the main hero, that would be a That'd be
Yeah.
something. It would make sense. I get where you're coming from. I don't know if I buy it. It's one of those where it's out of character enough for me to go, huh, but it's not enough to break my suspension of disbelief isn't the right term, but that's what I'm going to use. It's one of those things where when I read it for the first time, I'm like, oh, all right. And then after reading all of Berserk
No, it feels
proper,
out of character.
I went,
It's like,
yeah. It's just one of those things where I didn't notice it at the time. Then I thought back to it and I'm like, huh. And this is just one of those things where it goes back to Miura finding his footing. So another kind of example of that would be the fight with the Snake Apostle. I don't know his actual name.
Oh, I don't either. Some from Coca Castle, that's all I know.
Let's call him Viper.
Awesome.
That seems
cool name.
Yeah. The fight with Viper happens at night. Now, the only thing about this that I would need to also go back and reread other parts of Berserk, but the fact that evil spirits weren't chomping at the bit at Guts during this fight, I found a bit odd. It's not really brought up. Like, while he's in the prison cell at the castle, spirits aren't coming to get him. I found that strange, since the actual main point of the second chapter is establishing that spirits are haunting Guts all the goddamn time, and they're not giving him even a moment's respite.
I would say there, yeah, because again, the thing with the Black Swordsman arc is its job is trying to set the tone, and that does become such a heavy emphasis later on for Guts. Later on, we see during that conviction arc period where he has the evil spirits taunting him about the Beast of Darkness. And I feel like here would have been, like you said, probably the most appropriate time for these evil spirits to be at like 200% going after him, especially in the state he was in, broken down in a dirty old cell. So again, like you were bringing up before with the whole Miura finding his footing, it's like I think he knew what concept he was going for, but he didn't have all the, there were a lot of rough edges still.
Yeah, and I will state, the arc as a whole, a lot of these rough edges are just, they're smoothed out by chapter 2. So a part of me can see, like, this is, because it's a very self-contained one-shot story. After doing what he did with the prototype, he whipped this together and sent this off to publishers going, this is Berserk. And over the time, as he's, shopping around to get it published, I'd imagine, I'm theorizing, there's probably actual articles out there about this, but I'm stupid, I didn't look this up. I can see during that in-between time, he had some time to think, and he changed things. But because that was what he sent out to get published, he couldn't go back and change what he would reincorporate. But those are the only real misgivings I have. The only other one that I can think of is how adamant Guts is about getting touched. But this is also more personal opinion, because that is a big stick, like that's a big issue in the Golden Age. And then when you look at Lost Children and Conviction, not being touched doesn't really come up again. So when Puck touches him, he freaks out. And that was something I'm like, oh, I thought he got over that Golden Age. But yeah, it's one of those things where that's less of an issue, because it's like, if that came out of the blue during the Golden Age, it may come across as bizarre. I think, other than 11 minutes of complaining, the Black Swordsman chapter I do find to be very well put together. It introduces the tone, it introduces how Guts works as a character, and it also illustrates, Puck. I absolutely adore Puck during
He's
the
such
Black
an
Swordsman
important
arc.
character here. I'd agree, for sure. He does so much for the story.
He, if Puck didn't exist, I suspect the Black Swordsman arc would not be. Well, I actually wonder if Berserk would have even made it past the Black Swordsman arc.
Black Swordsman arc without Puck.
Because Puck makes it very clear and obvious that there's something else going on with Guts, and the story itself doesn't portray Guts' behavior in a positive light. It portrays him as borderline monstrous, and if we ever talk about it, maybe perhaps in another video, during the battle with the Count, there are a lot of parallels between Guts and the Apostle, the Count, where both of them are becoming monstrous to escape whatever happened in their past. There's quite a few lines that are said, but generally, Puck is the one who gives you that initial insight, and he's the moral center, for lack of a better term, outside of being a heel bot.
So my few other thoughts I would add to Puck's character is that I remember learning this when we were studying the play Macbeth, and Macbeth is supposedly one of Shakespeare's darker, plays and all of that, is the importance of comedy relief. And so Puck, I think, not only serves as that comedy relief character, but as you were saying, he's kind of like that moral center. And on top of that, he asks all of the questions that I was asking as a reader. And I felt like without Puck there to ask those questions, Guts again just comes off as this jerk that nobody ever says anything to. Puck's like, what's this brand? Why are you acting like this? And you can see just the disappointment and anger throughout this entire arc on Puck's face, and on later chapters when he's like, who is this guy and why is he like this? So I definitely think Puck's importance especially the first chapter can't be overstated.
Yeah. I find, throughout the entire arc, Puck is, I'm not going to say he's more important than Guts, but
yeah,
he's a lot of fun. So when I, getting into Berserk, I saw videos criticizing Puck. I was reading The Black Swordsman, and I'm like, why?
Yeah.
Puck is awesome. He's great. And like you said, the comedy relief. Later Berserk, about around the time Guts gets the Berserker armor, the comedy with Puck takes on a different tone. You don't really get the comedy in the first chapter, but you do get it in the second. This is Puck's comedy at its best, in the sense that it isn't over the top and it adds to the story and is actually acknowledged by the characters. While drinking wine, Puck makes a quip at Guts, and Guts kicks the barrel he's sitting on. It's a fun little moment. But outside of Puck just generally being our insight into, Guts' headspace, another good thing that Berserk does, especially in the first chapter, is the introduction of each piece of equipment. So you have the Dragon Slayer, which, thick, heavy slab of iron, cuts a guy in half. Good stuff. However, what also gets a lot of, actually arguably more screen time, the crossbow arm. That's his go-to weapon when dealing with everything in his way. And rereading it, it's actually kind of interesting, because I think he, by Black Swordsman, by Lost Children, it's gone, the crossbow hand, and it's just not used again, or it's destroyed.
I don't remember him using it in his fight against Rosine, if I remember correctly.
Which would have been really handy.
For sure.
No pun intended.
Oh, I get it. That took me a second.
Yep. Sometimes that happens, and it brings me great pain. The other piece, though, the cannon arm. So even though I have misgivings about the first 3 pages, it does put on full display why the cannon arm kicks ass, and it doesn't give you the money shot. It has him sticking his hand in the female apostle's mouth, and then we see these smoldering remains a bit later. However, when fighting Viper, we see why it works as well as it does. As he sticks it in his mouth, his hand comes down, and he blows his head off. So each piece of equipment has a proper role to play. It's good introduction, just visual standpoint, storytelling. It's good stuff.
Yeah, it did everything I think it needed to right there, introducing his different arsenals and weapons. Because I think if Guts were to never use that prosthetic arm of his, we wouldn't have paid attention much to it. So now we're also asking ourselves, why does he have this arm, right? And then the Dragon Slayer, of course, the big old beautiful giant slug of iron. Where did he get this from? How heavy is it? And how is he able to swing it like he does? And so all of the equipment being shown, his character design, the Black Swordsman dressed in all black. Again, just the first chapter doing all it needed to when it comes to Guts' arsenal and appearance right there.
I would say it's a pretty solid introduction to a series that finds its footing real quick. It has a few flaws. I'd say if this could be... Alright, I'm not saying it should be redone. Do not mistake me. But I'm saying if Miura had a time machine, he could probably do it better. But you could say this about any author. So it's one of those things where it's pretty solid all around, but I don't think it's perfect. It has just
minor
a few
flaws.
Yeah, it has a few ideas and a few facets of the story which are brought up a bit later, which just aren't present, that for consistency's sake kinda hurt. But it's one of those things where Berserk is a really well done work. Outside of hiatuses, there's not a lot wrong with it, at all. It's easier to find. That's not even easier. It's just one of those things where the work is so great these things are like slight blemishes, so they stick
yeah.
out a bit more. But yeah, do you have any other closing thoughts?
I'd say my only other closing thoughts to the first chapter of Berserk and its entire job is you pretty much said it. You know, it's not exactly perfect, but that's not really to be expected usually of a first starting chapter. I'm pretty sure most mangas' first chapter, you can point out some minor flaws and things that it had that, you know, later on get corrected and smoothed out. But I just love everything it did here with Puck, and I think Guts' character, I mean, he's Guts. What else can we really say about him? I just love how he's presented, even though this is him at his most edgy, and again, some things could have been a little fixed. Just Guts' ability to really address the other people around him and call them out for their BS. I just love it so much, and, you know, it gets you hooked on Guts' character, even if there are a few yikes here and there.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah.
Like, rereading it, it was a good time, and you're right. There are a lot of other manga, as I say it, because I'm a Midwestern boy and I like ticking off my audience.
Lovely.
Yep. A lot of other works out there have this similar problem, and it is what it is. I mean, things develop over time. So, if you put it among other, I guess, contemporaries, it probably stands out a hell of a lot better. But
I wonder, right? Because I don't know if this was normal back in the 80s, 90s. You know, I was born, 2001. And so me now, me being the somewhat religious person I am, I read, and so I'm reading Berserk, and I'm like, how was this taken back in 1989? Especially nowadays with, I don't know, because I've read a few other comics that are pretty graphic. Unless I haven't read a lot of the stuff from the 80s and 90s, Berserk comes off as really strong in any era, but I've always loved that rawness to it.
Yeah, I completely agree. But, yeah. So, guys, before I wrap this up, a link to the Masked Man's channel will be in the description. Show him some love, check out his stuff, and let us know what you thought in the comments down below. What do you think about the final chapter? The final chapter? First? Oh, no. Berserk's never gonna get a final chapter. What do you guys think about the first chapter? I thank you all for joining me, Masked Man. I thank you for joining me, and yeah,
peace.
See you all later.